Good morning. It's great to be back in the Durham region and with friends. But before I begin, I would like to acknowledge today is the 20th anniversary of the terrorist attacks on September 11th, 2001. On this day, we honor the memory of the 3,000 lives we lost, including 24 Canadian lives in these tragic attacks. And we honor the memory of the first responders who risked their lives that day to save others. Today is also the National Day of Service. So mark today with a commitment to remember and a commitment to build up your community. Avant de commencer, je veux commémorer les 20 ans des attaques du 11 septembre 2001. Aujourd'hui, on rend hommage aux 3,000 victimes, dont 24 Canadiens, au moment de ces attaques tragiques. On rend aussi hommage à la mémoire des premiers intervenants, les pompiers, les ambulanciers et les policiers, qui ont mis leur vie en danger pour sauver celle des autres. Aujourd'hui est la Journée nationale de service. C'est une opportunité pour se souvenir et redédier vos efforts pour construire votre communauté. Once again today, Justin Trudeau did not address the single most issue facing Canadian families, the rising cost of living. Mr. Trudeau is presiding over a shrinking economy with rising prices, a situation not seen more than 40 years. Justin Trudeau is trying to talk about everything except the most important things to Canadian families. It's time for Mr. Trudeau to step up, to stop blaming others and stop throwing mud. It is time to address the rising cost of living crisis in Canada. I grew up in Bowmanville, Ontario, not far from here, a little further down the highway. My dad worked at General Motors in Oshawa. I went to Bowmanville High School. Like many communities in the Greater Toronto Area, these suburbs are a great place to live, work, and raise your family. It's been my home for most of my life. I had a 905 phone number growing up. I'm a product of the 905. Because like my parents, I chose to then raise my family in the Toronto suburbs too. But like many families, I'm worried about the future. Far too many people across the region are trapped in gridlock every day. Far too many people, especially young people, are priced out of the housing market. And too many are already struggling with mortgage and car payments, buying gas and groceries, while Mr. Trudeau drives up the cost of everything with his out-of-control spending, borrowing, and debt. His Ottawa knows best approach to housing, transit, inflation, crime, and healthcare is simply not working for GTA workers or their families. With Justin Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh, you can expect more of the same. But there is another choice. We can make life better and more affordable for GTA residents and for all Canadians. L'approche Ottawa c'est tout pour le logement, le transport en commun, l'inflation et le système de soins de santé ne marche pas. Ça ne marche pas pour les travailleurs et les familles de la région du Grand Toronto. Avec Justin Trudeau et Jagmeet Singh, rien ne va changer. Heureusement, les Canadiens ont un autre choix. Ensemble, on va rendre la vie meilleure et plus abordable pour les résidents de la région du Grand Toronto et pour tous les Canadiens. Through Canada's recovery plan, we will get housing prices under control. We will build 1 million more homes over the next 3 years. We will ban foreign investors from buying homes if they're not planning to move and establish their lives here. We'll also ensure that more housing gets built near new transit projects so that transit gets built where people will be living. And while I'm on the topic of transit, it's time to stop talking about it and just get it done. Canada's Conservatives will get shovels in the ground on transit to cut commute times and make life easier for GTA workers and their families. We will support all 4 subway lines of Ontario's GTA transit plan. The Ontario line, the Yonge North subway extension to Markham and Richmond Hill, the 3-stop Scarborough subway extension, and the Eglinton Crosstown West Extension serving Etobicoke and Mississauga. These projects will create hundreds of thousands of jobs and cut as much as 40 minutes off daily commute times. That's more time with family. A Conservative government will also support the GO Rail expansion project that will offer two-way, all-day service every 15 minutes for riders in core segments of the network. Trains will run 29% faster and increase service from 1,500 trips a week to 6,000 trips a week. Whether it's getting you to work or to a Jays game, our Conservative plan will get the GTA moving. To make life more affordable, a Conservative government will give families a break on their purchases with a GST holiday starting in December. We will act quickly to lower food prices by cracking down on price fixing and having a grocery code of conduct. And we will get inflation under control by stopping Justin Trudeau's out-of-control spending and chart a responsible path to a balanced budget over the next decade. We also know that GTA families are worried about recent episodes of gun and gang violence in our communities. A Conservative government will put more boots on the ground in the GTA by hiring an additional 200 RCMP officers to help keep guns, gangs, and drugs off our streets. I want to thank our local police forces across the GTA for everything they do to keep us safe. As Ontario wrestles with the fourth wave of COVID-19, a Conservative government is ready to make historic investments to reinforce our universal healthcare system. We have a detailed plan to fight the Delta-driven fourth wave of COVID-19. We will also cut hospital wait times by increasing health transfers by 6% every year, representing nearly a $60 billion investment over the next decade. That's more money for hospitals, for nurses, for PSWs, and for mental health services. L'Ontario fait face à une quatrième vague de la COVID-19. Un gouvernement conservateur est prêt à faire de gros investissements pour renforcer notre système de santé universel. On a un plan détaillé pour lutter contre la quatrième vague du variant Delta. On va aussi réduire les temps d'attente à l'hôpital. Pour ce faire, on va augmenter les transferts pour la santé de 6% par année. Ça représente un investissement de près de 60 milliards de dollars sur 10 ans. C'est plus d'argent pour les hôpitaux, les personnels infirmiers, les personnels de soutien et pour les services de santé mentale. All politics is local. It's time Canada had a Prime Minister from the 905, from the GTA. It's time we had a Prime Minister who personally knows and understands the challenges facing our communities. Because I grew up here, raised a family here. Someone who will get GO Transit and TTC expansions built because he was a commuter on them for years. Someone to be your voice in Ottawa. C'est le temps d'avoir un Premier ministre qui connaît et qui comprend les défis de nos communautés. Je les connais parfaitement. J'ai grandi ici avec ma famille. Je vais être votre voix à Ottawa. I will fight for GTA families and for all Canadians. On September 20th, vote to get our economy back on track. Vote to secure the future. Vote Conservative. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
We will now be taking questions.
Thank you.
First question.
Hi there, Mr. O'Toole. It's David Cochran with CBC News. You said all politics is local. I want to ask you a question about some of your candidates. In Peterborough, Kawartha, your candidate, Michelle Ferreri, she's not fully vaccinated because it's not a requirement to run for your party. She's partially vaccinated, has had one shot, but she's posted pictures of herself campaigning in a senior's retirement home. Do you think it's acceptable for candidates who are not fully vaccinated to be campaigning in high-risk settings like a senior's home?
Well, David, as you know, this gives me an opportunity to tell Canadians how important vaccines are, how they're safe and effective for use, and that I encourage everyone to get vaccinated, the first dose and the second dose, and we're going to need boosters in the coming months. We need to get that vaccination rate up. These are personal decisions, but they're critical decisions. And we also have a campaign rule that people will be using vaccines and daily rapid testing, along with all other masking and distance efforts to keep people safe in a campaign in the fourth wave of a pandemic. But I have to comment on the fact that we're in a campaign because of Mr. Trudeau's own political ambitions, not because of the well-being of the country, but we will follow all measures to keep people safe.
So I guess, again, I want to come back to that. I know you are personally pro-vaccine. You've been vaccinated. You've done the PSA. You've shown us you getting your vaccine, but your candidate is not fully vaccinated, and she is campaigning in a senior's retirement home. Is that an acceptable activity for someone who is not fully vaccinated against COVID-19?
As I've said, we will be following all measures, including vaccines, daily rapid testing, masking, and social distancing to keep people safe. That's not only an expectation, it's a commitment that all members of our team have to keep people safe in a pandemic election that Mr. Trudeau called. No party wanted him to call this election. In fact, we had a vote in Parliament to not have an election during the pandemic. Mr. Trudeau ignored that because he will always put his own interests first. Ignored the situation in Afghanistan, the forest fires, the fourth wave. Canadians are tired of a prime minister who thinks about himself before he thinks about the country. Tous nos candidats doivent suivre les règles sanitaires et utiliser les vaccins, les tests de dépistage rapides quotidiens et les masques et les autres mesures parce qu'on doit travailler ensemble dans notre lutte contre la COVID-19. Mais nous sommes en pleine d'une élection, en pleine d'une pandémie à cause de M. Trudeau. Et ce n'est pas le temps pour une élection, mais on doit prendre les mesures de protéger tous les Canadiens et Canadiennes.
Next question.
Good morning, Mr. O'Toole. It's Bill Curry from the Globe and Mail. I'd like to get your reaction to the book excerpt published this morning by Jody Wilson-Raybould, providing new details of her interactions with the Prime Minister around the SNC-Lavalin affair. She felt that the Prime Minister wanted her to lie about events. And Mr. Trudeau today in his news conference said he rejects that characterization. What's your assessment of this?
Canadians no longer believe Justin Trudeau. He ran on sunny ways, promises, a different style approach to politics, he said. We saw with how he treated Jody Wilson-Raybould, how he put the interests of a corporate entity lobbying about a judicial proceeding ahead of doing the right thing for a cabinet minister. It's a reminder that Mr. Trudeau will say and do anything to win and never has any intention of actually putting Canadians and the needs of the country first. I have great respect for Ms. Wilson-Raybould, and I think her departure from politics is yet another sign that Mr. Trudeau has constantly let people down and misrepresented himself. He's run the most corrupt, cover-up-prone government in our history. And in Whitby, we remember Selina Cesar-Chavans as well, yet another woman who resigned from Mr. Trudeau's team because of his personal conduct and leadership style. Canadians deserve better. They deserve a government that will be ethical and transparent. And Canada's recovery plan, our second pillar, is to clean up the mess in Ottawa. On doit faire le ménage à Ottawa après 6 ans d'un gouvernement corrompu et tout le temps en plein d'un camouflage. Les Canadiens, les Canadiennes méritent mieux. J'ai beaucoup de respect pour Mme Wilson-Raybould et la situation avec le scandale SNC-Lavalin était un autre exemple d'un gouvernement et un premier ministre sans éthique. C'était la même chose ici à Whitby avec une autre ancienne députée libérale, Selina Cesar-Chavans. Elle a quitté la vie en politique à cause de M. Trudeau. Les Canadiens, les Canadiennes méritent mieux.
So today you're saying you support the expansion of 4 subway lines, GO Rail expansion. Your news release mentions Via Rail expansion to Quebec City, which is a very expensive project. And yet your platform costing has $0 for any of that. Kevin Page, the former parliamentary budget officer, has given your platform failing grade for fiscal responsibility. So how do you explain the fact that you're promising these very expensive things that are not costed in your platform?
I'm going to get things built. I'm going to get shovels in the ground. I'm going to get things done. The problem with Mr. Trudeau, as I said in the debates, his ambition is never matched with achievement. They have announced money for transit, but have never gotten the money out the door and the project's built. We're going to get it built. We're going to take the allocations for infrastructure and push it out very quickly, get these lines built, and then add the requirement to see housing and density to go alongside these critical transit investments. So to give better public transit and to tackle the housing crisis. The parliamentary budget officer, the current one, confirms that Mr. Trudeau only spends about 60% of what he announces. We need shovels in the ground. We need to cut commute times. We need to fight the housing and inflation crisis. We have a plan to do that. And as someone that took the TTC, the 501 streetcar, the Yonge line, the Lakeshore East line, I know the GTA needs transit built. We will get it built.
Next question.
Good morning, Mr. O'Toole. Joyce Napier, CTV News. I want to ask you about vaccinations. You've been asked several times how many of your candidates have been vaccinated, and you haven't answered. If some of these candidates do win, they won't be able to take a train or a plane to Ottawa. There's a lot of things they won't be able to do. What will you do in that case?
Well, I've said the vaccines are critical, and we have a plan to get vaccination rates up to 90%. Canadians have done their part. We were 4 months late in getting a steady supply of vaccine because of Mr. Trudeau's failed partnership with China. But once the vaccines were here in numbers, the provinces got them out. We got vaccines up to almost 80%. Let's get it to 90. We've got a plan to get there. They're safe and effective. Our issue is we need to make sure that people have any questions they might have answered. This is a personal health decision that we will respect. We will also make sure that rapid testing can be used on a daily basis as well. There are a lot of measures we can take to keep people safe, and we need to keep variants out of the country as well. So Mr. Trudeau was late in keeping the Delta variant out. We will not be. We will always put the health of Canadians first.
We are in the GTA, and the Liberals hold about 80% of these seats. You were in Whitby yesterday. You're back here today. It's a riding you lost in 2015. You didn't win back in 2019. What makes you think you will win it this time?
Well, I'm next door to my riding, and we've got Maliha Shahid, a councillor here who is an incredible, passionate advocate for Whitby, for the Durham region. And we are here to fight the housing crisis, to fight the cost of living crisis. Mr. Trudeau's absent MP was put in after Selina César-Chavans resigned, yet another woman who resigned from the Liberal caucus over Mr. Trudeau's ethical conduct and his leadership style. We have Ms. Wilson-Raybould's book excerpt out today, reminding Canadians, Mr. Trudeau says one thing and always lets you down. We will not let you down. We've got the plan. We've got an incredible team. And families in Whitby, families across the GTA deserve better than a corrupt government that's always letting them down on critical things for their families.
Prochaine question.
Avant en français sur ce que vous avez à offrir aux Canadiens de la grande région de Toronto cette fois-ci, juste en français.
Je suis un petit gars de la grande région de Toronto. Je suis un gars de les banlieues de Toronto. J'ai utilisé le transport en commun. J'ai travaillé dans le centre-ville de Toronto. Je suis un père de famille des banlieues et je vais lutter pour les familles comme ça, les familles à Whitby, à Pickering, à Ajax, à Milton, parce que les familles méritent mieux que les belles paroles que M. Trudeau est sans action sur la crise du logement, sur la crise du coût de la vie. On a un plan pour le rétablissement du Canada. On a une équipe expérimentée et forte comme Liha Shahid ici à Whitby. Et nous sommes ici pour une relance économique pour toutes les familles.
Bonjour, Monsieur O'Toole, Laurence Martin de Radio-Canada. Vous le dites, vous êtes en Ontario. Doug Ford est un progressiste conservateur. Pourtant, il n'est pas à vos côtés. Pourquoi?
Je vais travailler avec tous les premiers ministres sur une reprise économique dans tous les secteurs, dans toutes les régions. J'ai beaucoup de respect pour Premier ministre Ford, Premier ministre Oregon, Premier ministre Legault, et on doit travailler ensemble. J'ai proposé un fédéralisme de partenariat dans mon contrat avec les Québécois et les Québécoises, mais je vais avoir la même approche pour le pays. On doit travailler ensemble. Et après 6 ans de division avec M. Trudeau, les Canadiens, les Québécois méritent un partenaire à Ottawa, pas une paternaliste.
Est-ce que l'équipe de M. Ford vous a approché pour vous dire qu'il pouvait faire campagne avec vous? Et si oui, que leur avez-vous répondu?
J'ai des bonnes relations avec des députés provinciaux ici en Ontario et à travers le pays. Je suis un ancien bénévole pour le parti ici en Ontario et on a des relations importantes. Et comme j'ai dit, je vais travailler avec tous les premiers ministres, tous les autres paliers du gouvernement, incluant ici à Whitby, à Oshawa, pour le bien-être de leurs citoyens. C'est pourquoi on a un plan pour le rétablissement du Canada, un plan qui va cibler sur la crise du logement, le transport en commun, les priorités pour les municipalités, pour les provinces. Les autres paliers du gouvernement méritent une approche de partenariat.
Next question.
Chris Reynolds, Canadian Press. Yesterday we learned that you had opted to dump Lisa Robinson as a candidate for the Conservatives in Beaches East York in Toronto after what appeared to be Islamophobic comments, tweets from 2017. But you've also opted to keep on Steve Cotter in Central Nova after what might be considered comparable comments on his Facebook page. So I'm wondering about why the decision to dump Ms. Robinson and to retain Mr. Cotter.
As you know, I've said from the beginning of this campaign, we're running a positive campaign based on bringing the country together and getting the country back on its feet from an economic and health point of view. And I want people on my team that share that exact same approach. And that's how we approach all issues related to the campaign. We're here to bring the country together. We're here to offer a plan. And all candidates, like everyone in my caucus, will commit to the 5 pillars of Canada's recovery plan and a positive campaign because we're tired of 6 years of Mr. Trudeau and the division and letting people down. We have to step up for the country, and that's my expectations for all our candidates.
As my colleague Bill Curry with The Globe noted earlier, your platform does not have any costing attached to pledges around investment in public transit, which you're stressing today. Would you commit to at least, say, $5 billion in spending on public transit were you to enter the Prime Minister's office?
We're going to get transit projects in the GTA built. It's enough talk. The other levels of government want it. I know the premiers, the mayors, they need a federal government that will get the money out the door and shovels built. I've said in our housing plan, we also want to tie it to increasing density across the country to fight the housing crisis. That's exactly what Ontario is doing as well. Mr. Trudeau has allocated funds that are there. He only gets barely half of the funds deployed to build transit. Part of our economic recovery, part of securing the future, is those jobs. We need to build things. We need to get transit built. We need to cut commute times. We need to tackle the housing crisis. And as someone that has taken transit here in the GTA, I will get it built. The money is in large part allocated in the framework over the next decade. But unless you have a government that can actually deliver, it's not going to get projects done. We will get the money out the door and the shovels in the ground.
Next question.
Good morning, Mr. O'Toole. Doug Boyd from Rogers TV. Can you tell us what would it mean for you and for the Durham region if you're elected as the Prime Minister on September 20th?
Well, thank you, Doug. As I said, it's great to be back here in the Durham region. I'm very proud to represent the areas I grew up, Bowmanville and Port Perry, in Parliament, and I've worked hard to be an ethical leader focused on jobs and opportunity for families and seniors. I would be the first Prime Minister from the Greater Toronto Area, an area of our country critical for our economic success as a country. I served the country, I worked in the private sector here. I will fight for the families, the small business owners who are worried about the future. So I think it's an exciting opportunity to have a kid from the 905 lead this great country.
You have 9 more days left until the election day. Can you tell us what the most challenging parts have been during this election and most inspiring parts during this election for yourself?
The most inspiring has just been meeting Canadians. I was in Mississauga yesterday, and people were coming up to me on the street saying, thank you. We need a plan for the future. We need a Prime Minister that actually follows through. And when strangers are coming up and saying they know about Canada's recovery plan, they like my track record of getting things done, that motivates me. I'm not here to represent a small group of interests and friends like Mr. Trudeau. I'm here to fight for all Canadians. I'm here to fight for another young girl or boy from Whitby or Bowmanville or Oshawa to be able to work hard, help others, and have the chance to lead, I think, the greatest country on earth. This is a privilege for me, which is why I'm going to be ethical and I'm going to be focused on Canadians, unlike the Prime Minister who has us in a pandemic election because he always focuses on himself. We need a change.
Next question.
Good morning, Mr. O'Toole. Chris Selly from the National Post. You mentioned your plan to clean up the mess in Ottawa as sort of I guess, a remedy for the sort of thing that we read about today in Ms. Wilson-Raybould's book excerpt. I'm wondering, I mean, do you really think that a $50,000 fine would have stopped Mr. Trudeau from doing that, or would stop a future Prime Minister from, indulging that same sort of instinct?
That's a great question, Chris. The ethics code used to be there with no penalties attached because they thought the shame attached with breaching ethics laws would be embarrassing or hurt a politician. Mr. Trudeau clearly has no shame. He's broken the rules several times, been under investigation. And what type of example as a leader does that send to his cabinet? Private island holidays, the SNC-Lavalin, the We Charity scandal. He is setting an example of corruption. We deserve better, so we're going to have consequences attached that will rise according with how many times you've been found to violate the rules. We're going to have more transparency so that the We Charity situation and others have to register for meeting with the government when they're asking for money or programs. To think they can slip through loopholes is unacceptable. And the SNC-Lavalin scandal, which Ms. Wilson-Raybould felt pressured to lie from the Prime Minister, that is completely unacceptable. It shows a complete empty leadership with Mr. Trudeau. We're going to ban the ability to even lobby for issues that are before the courts. They shouldn't be able to use inside connections to the Liberal Party to get out of criminal prosecutions. We've got to clean up the mess. On doit faire le ménage à Ottawa. C'est totalement inacceptable pour une grande entreprise d'avoir un processus de lobbying contre un processus judiciaire. On va arrêter ça. On va avoir une approche plus de transparence avec lobbying. On va mettre en place des pénalités pour les violations de code d'éthique. Les Canadiens et les Canadiennes méritent un gouvernement éthique et ciblé sur leurs intérêts. C'est pourquoi dans notre plan pour le rétablissement du Canada, notre deuxième palier est sur l'éthique et une loi anti-corruption.
You've been talking about a changed Conservative Party in recent days. I know you've mentioned climate change specifically, but I'm wondering what sort of 3 or 4 things specifically you want people to think of as having changed about the party.
Well, I'd say we have a new leader that has a new style, that has experiences across this country in uniform, in the private sector. And like many of my friends and colleagues here, I was a volunteer in my community before I stepped up to serve. That's the type of leadership style I will have. And we will tackle the issues Canadians are worried about in 2021. Climate change, inequalities, a rise in intolerance, including Islamophobia, racism, anti-Semitism. We're going to tackle the issues Canadians want. Canadians know we're very focused on Canada's economic recovery. We have a 5-point plan to get the country back on track. But Canada's Conservative Party is welcoming all Canadians to join us to get this recovery started and to tackle the challenges, but also the opportunities for our country over the next decade.
This will be the last question. Ce sera la dernière question.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. O'Toole. David Aiken from Global News. I listened to your speech last night, and I just want to come zero in on one line. I'm going to read it back to you with almost the same inflection you did, which was, unlike Mr. Trudeau, I did a few things before I got into Parliament. Now, we all know that before he got into Parliament, Mr. Trudeau was a teacher. So I wonder if you could explain to Canadians, what is it about being a teacher that makes you uniquely less qualified to be a member of Parliament?
Well, that's an important question. Mr. Trudeau, when he joined Parliament, was a public speaker, a paid public speaker. And in fact, he kept getting paid, David, to give speeches while he was an MP. And I know most MPs love going to Rotary Club breakfasts, to the Lions Club, to Chambers of Commerce, where we don't expect to be paid to speak. When you're running to represent your community, you're running to be there to be accountable. So Mr. Trudeau's time before office, he was giving speeches based on who he was, not based on what he had accomplished in his life. I respect everyone in this race that I'm running against, but Mr. Trudeau has always focused on himself, his friends, his family, and the crisis and the scandals show that on a daily basis. I'll be focused, as I have been since I graduated from high school not far from here, on the well-being of the country, and I'll invite Canadians to draw the comparison.
This is the 7th federal election I've covered, and I've never seen a Conservative Party release a costed platform when their finance critic or leader wasn't available to present it and talk about it. You presented a costed platform. It might have been sort of middle of the night kind of thing, 2 nights ago before the debate. And I wonder if it's because of this. We're going to have a deficit of $138 billion this year. And if you're elected, it's going to be $30 billion bigger than that. And that's bigger than the Liberals. The candidate in my riding is a guy named Pierre Poilievre. And I don't know if you've told him about this, but you're going to be borrowing way more money than your chief opponent, Justin Trudeau. Can you tell fiscal conservatives like Pierre Poilievre and others why you think it's important to borrow more money than the Liberals are going to borrow this year?
Well, there's a couple things there, David. The first thing is we worked with the Parliamentary Budget Officer system to cost our platform as quickly as we could. Mr. Trudeau set these rules, called a pandemic election. We submitted it on day one because we've got a plan to secure our future. And this plan is costed to get our budget back into balance over the next decade. And I want small businesses to survive. I want to create 1 million jobs in 1 year. I want to make a record investment in our public health care system, on mental health, on treatment for addiction. I want our economy to be well. I want families and communities to be well. And we're going to invest to make that happen, but also do it in a way that can get our spending under control over the course of 10 years. That is our commitment. It's a costed plan, and quite frankly, it's a plan that Canada needs after 6 years of ethics violations, record deficits, record debt, and declining influence in the world. It's time for change.
It will be all for today. Ce sera tout pour aujourd'hui. Merci. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.